Be sure to check out mythvisionpodcast.com. Help MythVision grow, guys. Become a Patreon member. You guys will get early access to all my videos when I'm done editing them. Also, it's a small community where you guys can message me your questions and talk to me in private. You guys can also donate through PayPal and Cash App. Join the social media links down in the description. We have Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of social media. Help the community of MythVision grow. Hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so you guys are notified every time I do a live video and you don't miss any of my content. Dr. Price, another donor, Rich G. I hope Dr. Price is well. I've been reading his books as well as listening to his podcast for years. I would love to pick his brain on lots of things, but I'm curious about his opinion on the notion that the Gospel of Marcion was the original proto-gospel. That was not only the basis for Luke, but predated Mark. This thesis is put forth by Matthias Klinghart. I don't know if you heard
Probably
that.
right.
Klinghart, Klinghardt. Unfortunately, I don't read German, so I can't read his book. But other scholars, Bedun, B-E-D-U-H-N,
Oh, Jason Bedun, yeah.
for example, have put forth a similar thesis. Tom Dijkstra, D-Y-K-S,
Dijkstra, another great Dutch name.
And others have also argued that the Gospel of Mark was probably based on Paul's letters, particularly Galatians and 1 Corinthians. This would be consistent with the Marcionite origin. Marcion turned, or perhaps created, Paul's letters into Scripture. It would also at least partially explain why the Gospel of Mark is not well attested to by early church fathers. It existed, but it was in a proto-form and associated with Marcionism. What we now know as the Gospel of Mark was cleaned up and canonized to help secure some of the Marcionite churches into the new orthodoxy. Thoughts on this theory?
Yeah, I need to look at this more closely. I know Paul Couchot thought that Marcion's gospel was another synoptic gospel that was used in, I think, creating Luke and Matthew even, and that we don't have it anymore. I cannot remember the ins and outs of that. I got to check that out. But this is a similar one. I know some people say that Mark was the Marcionite gospel. I don't see how that would be, because the way the church fathers do these pretty under the microscope comparisons, it's clear that their copy of the Marcionite gospel was such that they thought it's another version of Luke. I don't think they would have said that if it was just a slightly different Mark, but you got to wonder, Mark and Marcion are really the same name, and Mark's gospel has this unremitting, unflattering treatment of the 12. Some of it's for literary reasons, maybe even most of it, because they got to be like the old minstrel shows. You'd have these two comedians. One would Mr. Interlocutor, question asker, and Mr. Bones. And Mr. Interlocutor would ask some stupid question, and Mr. Bones would give him the right answer. And that's what's happening, obviously, in the Gospel of John, where Jesus says, I've come down from heaven and all that. And they say, and this guy, he came down from heaven? Or unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. What the hell is this? Cannibalism? No. How can a guy enter into his mother's womb and be born a second time? No, that's and the disciples are often like that too. They Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7? He's expecting a pat on the head. He says, no, I tell you 70 times 7. And all of these questions are like this to anticipating that the reader may have a similar dim-witted grasp of this, to give Jesus the chance to clarify it for the reader. And so often Peter, who's usually Mr. Disciples, he's just the straight man, like Ananda is in the Buddhist stories, or Dr. Watson in Sherlock Holmes, or Jimmy Olsen on the Superman radio show. You got to have somebody to elicit a comment from the big guy. And so maybe it's all that. But Peter does look pretty bad when he's Jesus, never heard of him. And I mean, that's like committing apostasy according to the same gospel. So you got to wonder, there might be something to it. I still haven't worked that out.
So it kind of, it's one thing to say it's a literary trope, it's some type of thing. It's another when we know that Paul, or the writer of the Pauline epistles, clearly has a similar view of the 12 being the super apostles. And I learned nothing from them. They didn't contribute anything. They have nothing to teach me. The good guy upstairs taught me. So it's like, can you really cipher these two apart? Can you really say the literary tropes in Mark are any real difference to Paul's criticisms of the 12? Are they one and the same? And that's why you're...
Yeah, I mean... and by the way, in terms of influenced by Paul, I've always taken the view that the parallels between Paul and the teaching of Jesus in the Gospels don't mean that Paul is quoting Jesus or quoting the Gospels. He's not quoting any pre-Pauline tradition. It's just the other way around. When the Gospels are written, statements of Paul that have entered the oral tradition, people didn't remember who said it. Oh, it must have been Jesus. Like Jesus said, a penny saved is a penny earned, and such. Like I always give this example ad nauseum, I guess, but once years ago I was listening to one of my favorite radio shows. I think it was called Bible Questionnaire, with this great guy, Walter Bjork, who was a fundamentalist but a funny and reasonable guy. And he would answer people's Bible questions. That's kind of how I got the idea for the Bible Geek. And somebody said, Mr. Bjork, where in the Bible does it say neither borrower nor lender be? And he said, yeah, where is that? And he's going through his concordance. I can't find it. I was calling, trying to get through the switchboard and say, it ain't in the Bible, it's from Hamlet. And it wasn't stupid, it sounds biblical, and that's a perfect example of how those who take up the sword shall die by the sword. That was a common thing, or the truth shall make you free. It's a Stoic saying. Well, people heard it, so that sounds good. I bet Jesus must have said it. And so the gospel tradition grows. Well, some of Paul's maxims came in that way. But people like David Oliver Smith and others have said, no, let's cut to the chase. The evangelists had the Pauline epistles in front of them, and that's why there are these parallels. And I am not convinced of that. Some of the parallels they suggest I don't find close enough, but they could be right, and what I'm saying is almost that anyway. So depending on how you take it, it could be that it's influenced by Paul. I believe even Ralph P. Martin, an evangelical scholar, who was one of James Barr's maximal conservatives, but he was a very erudite, critical scholar, and nonetheless just the slant that apologists have sometimes. He thought that Mark was a Pauline gospel, that he was in the sect of Paul, you might say. Not least because of the story of the so-called strange exorcist. What a great one. Lord, you're going to be happy to know we saw some guy using your name to cast out demons, and we told him to cease and desist because he's working our side of the street. And Jesus says, you did what? Look, if he's casting out demons in my name, he's not going to be working against me. We can use all the friends we can get. Well, who was that? I suspect it was Paul. Just like it's Paul in Matthew's gospel, where he says on the last day people are going to be lined up to get in, and Jesus is the bouncer, and they say, I'm sorry, I don't see your name here. And this person says, Lord, don't you remember we used to work miracles and cast out demons in your name? He said, gee, I'm sorry, you're just not here. Get out of here, you workers of anomia, lawlessness. Sort of sounds like Paul to me. And he doesn't have the strange exorcist thing. Like, he knew what that was about. And cutting room floor.
I always scratched my head about that one. The whole, but I cast out demons in your name, and I did this in your name. I mean, that's a lot to say. Yeah. In your name.
Yeah.
This isn't... So one could argue, well, there's a place where the Pharisees tried using Jesus' name, and they did this. I get it.
The sons of Sceva in Acts.
Yeah. And they'll say, well, that's where this comes from, and who knows, it could. But I mean, to me, it's like, were they workers of lawlessness? I mean, it just...
Well, these guys wouldn't have been in Acts because their credential is that they're the sons of a Jewish high priest, probably bunk, but that was their thing, and they probably wouldn't have advocated dumping Torah observance if that were their big credential. But they didn't do it, right? They, well, at least in the one case we see, it didn't work.
Right.
So I don't know. But that is based on this guy who I call the Ephesian wild man is another version of the Gerasene demoniac.